Hey everybody, welcome to the Wicked Ones podcast. This is Tara.
And this is Jen.
Yeah, welcome back. So what's going on?
Same old, same old. It's just like Groundhog's Day all over again.
Every day.
We haven't had a lot going on this past week, which I guess is somewhat of a good thing.
Yeah, nothing major, nothing crazy, nothing to really complain about. So that's a positive. I did notice I'm very excited about this. So in our quest to do better with Instagram and figure out what we're doing on there, I've been noticing a lot more really great stories coming out now about these killers going down years later because of DNA and genealogy, which makes me really happy.
Yeah, I mean, all of those genealogy kits that are being gifted these holidays is probably, I'm hoping, make a big impact.
I hope so. So get those for your loved ones. Get your DNA in there. I'm sorry if Grandpa Joe's going down, but Grandpa Joe needs to go down if that's the case.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. Get it in there. Get it in there. These people need to pay for their crimes. They need to know that they did not get away with it. So that makes me happy to see, because that's something that we talk about all the time, that we have a passion for sure. And then also I noticed we talk about the Zodiac, and I told you it was one of the first cases that really got me interested in true crime, and they cracked the cipher this week, which I thought was really cool. Yeah.
That's surprising. I mean, I didn't even...
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't say, hey, my name is blank and I did XYZ. I mean, too bad that it doesn't. It's just kind of a rambling, but it's still really cool that they cracked it. So I'm not going to go into what it actually says. You can look that up for yourself. It's a long rambling, from the Zodiac, but it's just cool that they cracked it. They've been working on it for a really long time. So
it's exciting to know that no one has given up.
Yes. Knowing that all these cold cases and all of these things that are going on are, they're still digging into them, which is really cool. But I'm excited to hear what you have for me this week.
So this one doesn't have anything to do with DNA, surprising. Today I'm going to tell you about the Italian Hall disaster.
Okay.
And I'm going to apologize in advance because when I looked at my notes, I realized I am now giving you a history lesson. And you're going to learn more than you ever thought you needed to know about Michigan's copper country.
Oh, but you know what? I'm excited about that because it's a little different than some of the stories that we normally do. And I think that people that are into true crime are also into learning about some of these crazy things that happened in our history.
Yeah, so it's not, it's somewhat of crime, but it's not the typical story that I would tell. So I felt like you needed a little bit of a history about how and why the disaster happened.
Okay.
So the Italian Hall disaster occurred on December 24th, 1913, during a strike in the Michigan's copper country. And this strike lasted from the summer of 1913 to the spring of 1914. So, although it's never been quite proven, it's believed that this mass casualty tragedy was really in retaliation to the labor dispute that was going on in the copper mines at the time.
Okay.
So that's where it kind of the crime comes from.
Oh, okay.
It occurred in Red Jacket, Michigan, and today that area is known as Calumet.
Ah, yes.
And like I said, this happened during a time when workers who stood up for their rights and wanted fair treatment could be beaten, fired, or from what I tell you today, even worse. During this tragedy, at least 73 people died, and 59 of them were children.
So sad.
And yeah, it really is sad. So a little bit about Michigan's copper country. The area I'm talking about today is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, specifically in the Keweenaw region.
Okay.
I got that right.
Nice.
Copper was already known there and was discovered by the settlers in the mid 1800s. Investors began a plan once they found this out, and a new copper town was developed in that area, and that was Red Jacket. And Red Jacket, they took from a name of a famous Native American that was in that area.
Yeah, okay.
That's a whole nother story.
Right.
So this group of investors was called the Calumet Mining Company, and they developed in Red Jacket, and then other investors came to open another private mine. They were called Helka. I'm sorry, Hecla. And in 1871, the two companies decided that they were going to merge. So they became Calumet and Hecla, C&H.
Okay.
Miners from all over the world came to work for this company. British, Canadians, Italians, Austrians, Finns, and Croatians, they all came.
Yeah, sure.
It
Well, I
was
mean, it was big business, and that's where,
ros-
yeah,
ran mostly by immigrant labor
yeah.
workers. So CNH, they were really good at what they did. So, and from 1868 into 1886, they were the leading copper producers in the United States.
Oh, wow. And when you think of copper, I always think of like Missouri. I always think of down south a little bit more.
Yeah.
But so that's interesting.
And then from 1869 to 1876, they were the leading copper producer in the world.
Wow.
So they were big time. From 1871 to 1880, they turned out more than half of the copper produced in the United States. And they had the deepest vertical mine shaft of 4,900 feet. And that's the deepest in the world. Could you
Just the
imagine working
no,
in that?
no, just the thought, like when I picture those people getting in those elevators and down into this like hole in the ground, it just
I have a ton of
terrifies me.
pictures.
I think it's
It's crazy.
crazy.
These cars would be filled with like 40 men and going down.
Well, and then you hear all these stories too with miners who get trapped, and then that's it. I mean, you never going to work for the day, but don't know if I'm gonna make it home for dinner. I mean,
It's,
scary.
yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the
Oh,
dangers of it.
okay.
I had no idea copper mining was such a serious business and what it all entailed.
I don't know anything
I was
about it.
completely
No.
ignorant to the whole thing. So, copper being found in very remote areas obviously brings its challenges
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because how do you have your workers there? So, these private mining companies would essentially create entire towns
Oh, wow.
around the
I mean, I
mine.
guess you would have to. That makes sense.
And so they would have homes, schools, hospitals, stores, but all of these were owned by the mining company.
Mhm.
CNH they prided themselves on being a little bit more top notch as far as taking care of their employees
Mhm.
opposed to other mining companies. So in 1868, they built the first industrial hospital on their property. In 1877, they actually started an employee aid fund to aid their ill and injured employees, which
Oh.
was their employees could participate voluntarily, and then each participating worker would contribute 50 cents a week, and CNH actually matched them.
Oh, I mean, that was probably unheard of until
This is
then.
in
Yeah. Yeah. So
1877.
it sounds like they were really trying to do good by their
It
people.
seems like they are.
Yeah.
They're credited as one of the first American companies to set up an employee health benefit fund and to actually manage and contribute to
Mhm.
match their employees.
Yeah.
So by 1908, in this area, the company had even provided a staff of physicians and its hospital for employees and their family. They had worker clubhouses with bowling alleys. They had employee libraries and reading material in 20 languages, which we know is really important
Mhm.
because there is immigration from so many different areas.
Oh,
There's so many
yeah.
different languages. So they really,
Sounds like they really tried to make
yeah,
it a nice
a
place to
nice
live.
area. And
Yeah.
then the company also supplied consumer goods to their employees. So it would provide like coal, firewood, electricity, all of these things at wholesale prices.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It sounds great, doesn't it?
It sounds great, but I have a feeling.
It's a double-edged sword. So
Right? Well, when one company owns all of that and has that much control over the people in their lives, it can get dicey.
yeah, and it does.
Hmm.
So CNH, like a lot of the other mining companies in copper country, they were accused of paternalism, which is was most evident in the housing.
Hmm.
So they built hundreds of company homes and they provided them to married couples and families.
Hmm.
And they gave it a very low rent, so there was no profit for the company. It was just housing, which
Okay.
seems like a plus. They also allowed employees to build houses on their property,
Okay.
but they often did these with shady contracts
Um,
that the people, their employees, couldn't even read. So they didn't know what they were signing, and but under the terms in which the company allowed them to use the land, they could force them to vacate their houses at any time.
okay. Okay.
So it really just like your relationship with the company really depended on your, I mean, whether
Your
you had a roof over your head
livelihood.
or not.
Yeah. Yeah. You
Uh
had to kind of watch your P's and Q's, and you had
did.
to.
And there was even favorism that was going
Of
on.
course
I
there
guess
was.
preferential treatment on the houses and what
Mhm.
property you would get, which then would cause issues among the coworkers. So they even said there were if there was issues at work, it could result in like restrictions or privileges of your personal time. Like maybe you weren't allowed in the clubhouse or
Yeah.
you didn't
Mhm.
get as much firewood. There was just
There's just ways to be punished that they kept you under their thumb is kind
right.
of
So
what I
if it
want to
was
say.
good, if it was good, it was good. But if it was bad, it was real bad.
Yeah.
And if you got fired, then you were evicted. You and your family were evicted, so that home could be used for the next minor taking your place.
Hmm. Well, yeah, okay. This
So
doesn't sound so great.
it depends on which way you look at it,
I
right?
mean, I'm sure for some people it was, but in other aspects, it's kind of like, well, you're kind of signing your life away to these people and hoping it all goes well and you don't ever have any
Have any
disputes.
issues?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So and mining itself, as we just said, is not the safest job. They're averaged one fatality and 10 serious injuries a week.
Wow, that many? I mean, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but
Yeah, and I suppose it probably depends on the size of the
mhm,
area, but in this area, that's what they were saying. That's a lot.
that is a lot. Is
So
this where they came up with the zero in with that little calendar, where you have like zero, what does it say? Incidents or whatever for the
oh
week.
yeah, for OSHA, right? I
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
wrote on here OSHA would be very unhappy.
yeah. They'd be like, "Where's the calendar, people? We need to
Yes,
keep an eye on
yes. We
this."
haven't
Yeah,
had an incident in 3 months. Yeah, we have one of those calendars.
yeah. I
Whenever
bet you
it
do.
gets changed back, everyone's like, oh.
Shit.
So obviously it's a dangerous, dangerous job. They're deep underground with no electricity. They use candles and lamps. They're down there for 10 to 12 hours a day for 6 to 7 days a week. The pay
Mm-mm.
was terribly low. It was mostly physical labor. And then I read one of like kind of the lowest positions, I guess, were trammers. And what the trammers did is they would actually push the buckets of copper on a rail. So right, the drillers were the people who were down there, and they
Hmm.
were kind of at the top of the hierarchy, right? Because they were considered like a skilled worker.
Okay. Yeah.
But the trammers were kind of like the grunt work. So they would fill the copper into the buckets and push it along this almost like a railroad.
Hmm.
And then so it says that those trammers were paid by pound
Oh.
of copper that they would move a day.
Okay.
Except there's no scale.
So how did they determine?
Apparently, your manager it was at their version of the pound that day.
Oh gosh. Okay.
So in theory, it sounds good, but then again, when it comes down to it, it really just didn't work out that way.
No.
And like I talked about, it was all immigrants, right? So there's huge language barriers. The job assignments were made by ethnicities, and they were anything but equal. So depending on your manager and what maybe if they didn't like Finns or if they didn't like
Yeah.
Italians,
Yeah.
it could really affect where your job
Hmm.
was and
Yeah.
whether you could move up or not.
Your kids weren't getting along at school with my kids, and your wife had an incident with mine, so it looks like you maybe moved like a pound and a half today. Sucks to be you.
Yeah, that yep,
That's
you
awful.
got it
Yeah.
exactly. And they were saying on average there's 5 to 6 languages in a mine.
Wow.
So
That's
I mean,
crazy.
can you imagine that
No.
language barrier and
No.
trying to work efficiently? That's insane.
Mm-mm. Well, no wonder there were so many injuries. I mean, people couldn't even warn other people if there was a problem.
No,
They didn't know what they were
it's
saying.
and that I mean when we get people at the hospital all the time when we obviously we have interpreters now, but I I can't imagine the level of fear that you have when you're in a bad situation or if you're sick or you're
Mm-hmm.
scared and not being able to communicate.
Yeah.
It's every I just can't
Mm-mm.
ever wrap my head around that. It's got to be
No.
so scary.
No.
So obviously, these working conditions brought the interest of a union.
Hmm.
They needed to protect themselves. And in 1909, the Western Federation of Miners, the WFM, established their presence in Calumet. So they were already big in Montana,
Okay.
but they were working their way. And then in between 1911 and 1912, there was an increase in the demand of copper just due to overall industrialization,
Hmm.
the use of electricity,
Sure.
automobiles, like all those things. But the increase in demand did not equal an increase in pay. So management decided to have some different thoughts about the process. And they looked for more of a scientific approach to mining and a reduction in bodies,
Okay.
which we all know we've been
We
there.
see that with technology. Every
It's
time
taking
something
jobs.
improves, it takes jobs away and less people are needed and more button pushers come into play.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this was the development of the one man drill. And like I said, but this didn't mean twice the work. So at first the miners were a little bit of they're kind of excited because then they thought more production, but that was not the case. They were going to cut the workforce in
Yeah.
half. And obviously then there was concern because you're no longer working in pairs.
Okay.
So that
So there's nobody there to
you always
help
had a
you.
buddy. So if you
Yeah.
had a one man drill and something were to happen, you had an emergency and you're down there, you're just
You're
yeah.
SOL.
And like I said, the drill operators were seen as skilled laborers, so they were higher on the ladder when they were compared to other mining jobs, and they were more of an equivalent to management. So they were seen kind of running in the same circle, and they often would see eye to eye on other labor disputes.
Mm-hmm.
They would kind of smooth things out, kind of work as like the middleman. But once the one man drill was introduced and they felt their job and their safety was in jeopardy, there's a huge shift there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So with all of those things, tensions were really
I can
rising.
imagine. Yeah.
Um, so by July of 1913, the Western Federation of Miners called for a general strike against mines in Michigan's Copper Country. By July 14th, 1913, they sent out an official letter to the Michigan mine managers, including Calumet and so CNH.
Mm-hmm.
And they, at that time, employed approximately 2,100 people. So the union was asking for an 8-hour day, a minimum wage of $3 a day. So that's up from 3 to 3.50 is what they wanted. And right now they were getting between $1.50 and $2.50.
Okay.
They wanted an end to the use of the one man drill. And they also wanted the companies to recognize the union as their representative.
I don't feel that any of those demands are too out of line
Right?
with. No, they
You're
sound.
so crazy and irrational.
Yeah, they sound pretty fair.
So one of the managers that got this was manager of CNH, James McNaughton. He's probably not the most stand-up guy from everything that I read. So he had actually worked for CNH from the age of 11
Okay.
and then later attended University of Michigan and came back and became management. He he was known as kind of an embellisher. He often insulted people. He was known for his anti-union stance. And under his management, there was like an unwritten policy of not hiring minors with any union history. So if you had any
Mm-hmm.
type of association, you weren't good with him. He also hired spies to spy on his
Oh,
employees.
sounds like a stand-up guy.
And he was very prejudiced against certain
Yeah,
ethnicities.
that's awful. That's not someone that you want managing your company.
No. Um, so like I said before, CNH, they prided themselves on being doing a little bit more than the average mining company in the area for their employees. So although they had high wages by copper country standards,
Uh,
so technically in that area, they were getting paid decently compared to other surrounding mining companies.
okay, so their dollar whatever was actually considered.
Yeah,
Okay.
they were actually making a little bit more than the other
Mhm.
companies in
It's
the
hard to
area.
imagine because back then, I mean, obviously wages are so different. So that
Yeah.
just sounds now in 2020, that just sounds like meager pay for
Oh, it
the
sounds
high demands and
and
the,
this is per
you know,
day.
yeah. And I mean, danger that these guys were.
But then they also, so it kind of, I don't know, this is probably a poor example, but it kind of reminds me of the military. Because when you live on base, you don't pay for
Hmm.
housing or
Yeah.
you pay a small amount. So you don't make so much, but you don't have to worry about your housing. And then you get your groceries at a wholesale
Yeah.
price at the
Yeah.
commissary.
Very similar.
So it's a very, I
Hmm.
don't know if that's a good analogy, but that's what it reminded me of. So they were their response to the letter was basically, you're already getting a little bit more money than the surrounding, areas or the
Hmm.
surrounding companies. And that we were already saying that we are going to reduce your day. Like we already said we were going to reduce your day, but weren't going to budge on the one man
Hmm.
drill. And then they also said basically stop comparing your wages to Montana because the union was using that as an example, obviously as a Midwest representative,
Hmm.
and they were saying that area of Montana has a higher standard of living, and that's why people make a little bit more there. So we can't pay you the same, which makes sense because
Yeah, I
people
know
in
that does too.
California
Hmm.
don't make the same as you do in Ohio.
No, no, you're right.
So I mean,
I can see that point of view.
yeah, I totally. So overall, though, the mine workers were divided. Not all of them were in favor of the strike because they were scared.
Oh,
This is their
I'm sure.
livelihood, and they
Yeah.
weren't willing to challenge the big mining companies. But still, with that being said, on July 23rd, 1913, the strike officially began. All of CNH's mines were shut down during the strike due to the miners refusing to work and also by physically blocking the mines, not allowing work to happen.
Oh,
So if you still wanted to work, you weren't going to work
you still
because
couldn't. No.
now the mine owners were scared. They thought that the strikers were to be violent. So they immediately went to Michigan's governor, Woodbridge Ferris, and asked for help. So he called in the National Guard immediately. They
Okay.
arrived the next day by 10 a.m.
Wow, that's fast.
Like, we talk about the National Guard coming for like
Oh,
months
I know.
before
We're like,
I,
where are they?
yeah,
What's happening?
right. And
Hello.
there's conflicting stories about what actually happened and the level of violence that went on. It kind of really
Hmm.
depends on where
Which
you,
side you were on, where you stood, what you, yeah.
yeah. So mine operators and the National Guard claimed that the strikers were terrorizing the town and described lawlessness and violence. But when looked at everything, there was only one fatality during the time that the National Guard was present in that area.
Hmm.
And that death was of a member of the National Guard, and his death was from getting kicked by a horse.
Okay, so that doesn't really have anything
It
to do with
doesn't,
what's
even
going
though it's
on. No.
documented, it didn't have anything to do with what
Hmm.
was
Yeah.
going on in that area. So obviously, the
I wonder if he
mine,
died of COVID too.
for sure, for sure. So the mine management, the mine companies weren't interested in negotiations. At this time, mining was great, so they had a surplus of cash and copper.
Hmm.
They weren't in dire need to negotiate or to get things going, but they still wanted to move forward a little bit. So they began to import foreign workers. So they
Okay.
were going to other areas of the country and getting workers who were unaware of what was happening. So
Okay.
they had no idea a strike was going on. Not cool.
No, no.
So they would put these immigrant workers on trains to Michigan. And then the expense of their ticket was deducted from their first week's wages.
Oh, okay.
Come
But
work
were
with
they able
us.
to get into work at this point?
So they were able to work. But as I read, and I don't know how true it is, but it says I read when they arrived that they were kept there at gunpoint and like kind of treated like prisoners or slaves. Like
Wow.
they were kind of kept in camps. I don't know how true that is because, and I'll tell you a little bit more. So meanwhile, there's this group developing in response to the WFM, right? So there's this
Mm-hmm.
union,
Yeah.
obviously a lot of businessmen and those investors are not happy with the union because they can't control. I mean, that's just common
Right,
sense,
right.
right? They can't control what's happening. So they formed this group called the Citizens Alliance. And it was mostly made up of businessmen, but it was funded by the mine owners. So we can
Okay.
see where this is going.
Yeah, yeah, you can.
They were paying the local newspaper to print positive reports concerning CNH. So, like I said, it's crazy. We talk about
So they
how
started fake news.
they started, right. So
Yeah.
we were talking about how we used to think how journalism was real, but apparently, I
Mhm.
mean, this is 1913 and it's
Mhm.
already
It's
happening.
already
They're
happening.
already
You can already slip in through the door and pay the man in the back and get a good
get
story.
yes,
Yeah.
it's insane. So CNH also they hired James Woodell, which he was in charge of a private security company and a strike breaker force. So he had
Mhm.
like this kind of like a company of thugs, I guess you could say.
Okay.
And they were armed and they protected the replacement workers, like you said. So they were able to work. So they were able to work at this point because now they had these strikebreakers and these thugs that were harassing and intimidating the strikers. So I can't
Okay.
imagine what it would be like to work in a mine where you have it's got to be a high stress situation
Ugh.
and then you
And
have
then
strikers that don't want you to work and these thugs with guns protecting you so
right.
you can work and you have no idea what you got yourself into
Gotcha.
because this was presented as a great opportunity but you
Mhm.
still have to pay for your train ticket.
Yeah.
I
No, that's crazy. Well, because it's like on one side they're like, "Welcome," and you're at gunpoint, and here we go, and it looks really awful. And then on the other side, they're like, "No, no, they were being protected, and we were making sure they could
yeah,
get to the mine." So you're like,
which do
what happened?"
you it's the yeah
It
it's
just doesn't sound good.
no
No.
no and even so some of these thugs that were hired the strike breakers and such were even deputized by the local sheriff.
Oh boy. Okay.
Scary. And then I just have
You get a shield, and you get a shield, and you
no, it's you can't be giving these
you
people
can't.
that type of authority. So there's a bunch of examples of both parties being violent,
Mhm.
but most of it is it's not organized violence from what I could find. So there would
Okay.
just be like one or two people that would act out individually, but they were associated with one or the
I
other.
gotcha, but you're gonna have that no matter what you're talking about. No
Exactly.
matter
So it's
what's
not like
going
they were
on.
like
Yeah.
planning these things. You just have someone who went rogue and made a bad
Yeah.
decision, and it starts.
Mhm. It starts a whole yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, I can see it.
you know how it goes. So
Mhm.
on August 14th, there was two striking miners that were killed by two strike breakers. Okay.
Okay.
So I found a couple different accounts of what actually happened, all very tragic,
Mm.
but there's some basic details. So two different miners, so not the ones that were killed, but two different ones took a shortcut over some mine property while walking to their boarding house. So they had left because at this time they were still getting a small amount of money from the WFM.
Okay.
They were giving them a little bit of food and a little bit of money for survival. So they had gone to get their supposed money for the day, which they didn't even get because they were running out of money. Came walking back, took a shortcut over the mine property. So strikebreakers who happened to be Waddell, the guy who has the not Secret Service, but the thug manager.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
He had a couple men there, and they were yelling warnings to the miners, like "You can't walk here,
Mhm.
get off the property," because now everything's just super aggressive and
Yeah. Oh,
any
yeah.
reason to start a fight. Well, they didn't understand. It was a different language, so they don't even know what these people are yelling at them. They just keep going. They went home. So then the strikebreakers they were unhappy and felt disrespected. So they actually go to the boarding house where they live to threaten them because that's what you do when you're a thug. So somehow things happened, bullets were shot into the house, and two other people who just happened to be their roommates were killed.
Oh, yeah.
And then there was also a baby that was injured in this because there was families still living there as well.
Because they had to prove a point and come start a fight and yeah.
Yes, yes. And so, like I said, there's a couple different accounts exactly on what happened when they got to the house
Mhm.
and how they entered the home, and
But in the end, it
but in the end,
just
it all
yeah.
that was the gist of it. And to make even worse, so they had to get five different interpreters to gather statements, and nothing ever came of it.
Well, hell no, they couldn't sort
They covered
anything
it all
out.
up. It was all just
Yeah.
swept under the rug. It
Yeah.
was nothing ever happened.
But I'm not surprised.
No, but it's not surprised, but it's still, I mean, this is 1913 and these things are happening. So
Mhm.
when we hear of these
Yeah.
things happening today, I always think, what happened to our world? Why is there so much
Yeah.
corruption when
Very true.
maybe it's always been going on? I don't know. But so now it's October, and with the exception of CNH, the other mine companies start evicting striking miners from their homes.
Okay.
If you're
Like
not going
you're
to
out of
work,
here. You're
you
out,
can't
yeah.
stay here.
See ya.
I
Gotcha.
guess a court order was made that prevented them from doing such things. So
So the people who were kicked out didn't leave.
I think they did have to leave, but eventually they stopped it from continuing.
Okay.
Is what
Okay.
it sounds like. So now winter is here, and the striking miners are in despair. I mean, they
Mhm.
haven't worked in 5 months.
Yeah.
They're living on donated food and financial assistance from the WFM, but it's running out.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
It's looking very grim for them. So Annie Klemnick of the WFM, she decides that she's going to host a Christmas party for the children of the striking miners because she really just wants to cheer
Mhm.
people up.
Yeah.
Now listen to this. This is what, and I want to read this to my kids. So the donations, she collected donations in hope that she could get something small for each of the children. So each child would receive one of, not all of them, either a hat, mittens, a piece of candy, or a piece of fruit.
Oh.
Take that, children, and your Xbox 5. I don't know what is it
Oh
that's out there right
God.
now.
Right.
PlayStation 5.
PlayStation 5,
So
Xbox, they're
each
all
one,
yeah.
you would get one of those. You would either get a hat or
Mhm.
mittens. Like you're not getting a goodie bag.
Yeah.
So she organizes this party. So on the afternoon of Christmas Eve, 1913, there is between 500 and 700 people at this local meeting space known as the Italian Hall.
Mhm.
So the party was being held on the upper floor of the two-story building, with many of the adults visiting the saloon on the lower level. But they were saying that more than half of this number of people is children because
Okay.
it's for families. It was
Well,
mostly
yeah.
for the
And it
kids.
was for the kids.
It
Yeah.
was for the kids, which just takes it to a whole nother
Yeah, it does. It does.
despicable
Mhm.
level. There's a steep stairway that was the only way to get to the second floor.
Okay.
You picture like those old buildings, right?
Yep.
So
I'm
there's
picturing
this
it now.
steep, narrow
Mhm.
stairway to get upstairs. And there's a poorly marked fire escape on one side of the building and ladders down the back of the building, but you could only reach it if you climbed out a window.
Okay.
So it wasn't like a door to this
Right.
area or whatever. You had to climb out a window. And at some point during the party, a stranger entered the building and yelled, "Fire."
I know. And I know of this story and I just
It's tragic.
it's awful.
Yeah, it's really bad. So there's no sign of fire or smoke. So Anne, she says, like, just relax.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
nothing going on here. Don't panic. But within seconds, the kids start rushing for the doorway. There's shrieks of fire. The word
Yeah,
spreads.
well, they're scared. I mean, it takes over, right? Your whole body.
You're fire?
You're terrified.
You're
You're
like, I'm just
get me
gonna
out, get
go.
me
I'm
out.
just
That's
gonna go.
all.
Or even if you just hear it and you're like, I'm just gonna start making my way to the entrance. And then you see all these people start going to the entrance and then people start running.
Uh-huh.
So, and they feel like they're really running from a fire. So some people were able to escape down the stairway, but eventually someone fell. And when that person fell, then others began to trip over on top of
Oh
them.
yeah.
And people still, the stairway became blocked, but people were still pushing to get out and
Mhm.
escape. So the children that were underneath were essentially being suffocated,
Yeah.
and bodies were on top of bodies. And
No one could move or
no,
breathe.
no, no.
Oh
And they said in less than a minute, there was a pile of bodies that was several feet high.
my
So you have to
gosh.
remember this is it's a very narrow stairway going
Mhm.
down.
Mhm.
So there's stacks of bodies at the bottom of the
Nobody can
stairs.
even get up. It
Nobody
would
can even open the
yeah.
door because you can't get to
You
the door
can't.
because of the bodies that are down there. The pictures are unreal.
I didn't see any pictures. I don't know that I want to.
No, so it only takes but a couple minutes for the fire department to show up because they're
Hmm.
only right across the street. But they have to come in from the top.
Does they had to come in through the windows up
So they
top,
had to
right?
use ladders to come in
Hmm.
through the windows at the top and start taking bodies from the top to the
And
bottom,
pulling them back.
pulling them up the stairs
Oh my god.
and putting them on the tables that were once for the festive
For the
holiday
yeah.
celebration. I can't even imagine.
No.
So it took them hours to get these bodies out. And like I said, the children were laid on the tables. Some did survive, but most were crushed and buried alive. And essentially, they just suffocated. And there is, so I said 59
Oh.
children. It varies a little bit. Some reports say 62 children, but
Hmm.
overall, it's 73
I just
people in total.
imagine these poor parents trying to get through that door to figure out where their children are and if they can help them.
I,
They couldn't do anything but sit back and
no,
know what was happening, and they couldn't do
no, it was a
anything about it.
stampede going
Yeah.
downstairs.
I mean, we talk about this, right? When we
Oh,
used to go to concerts and actually hang out with other
yeah,
people, we
yeah.
would talk about this, especially with just anything like a shooter or a bomb threat or anything. It's like, right? You
Yeah.
always
Well,
tell
there was
me,
in Chicago at Lala. There was, or in Vegas,
mm-hmm,
or it
yes,
turns into mass chaos.
it
You just
does.
your natural instinct kicks in, and you, like I said, these people were stepping on children that were laying on the ground, but you're falling. You're also for them, they're falling down the stairs. People are
Yeah,
shoving you down the
yeah,
stairs. And if there's more people on top of you coming down the stairs, you can't, like I said, they couldn't even get the door
no,
open.
they were trapped. They couldn't move. I mean, in other venues, we see people that trample other people, and that's usually the case of how they didn't make it because people were stepping on top of them to get to the exit, which is just awful and horrific in itself. But I can't even imagine this whole down the stairs scenario.
There's a little bit. I'll talk about this part at the end a little bit more because I'm not. I'll just talk about it now. There was a rumor saying that the doors at the bottom of the stairs opened inward, and that's why they couldn't get out
Okay.
because everybody is piled in front of the doors,
Yeah,
and
and you couldn't open
you
it.
couldn't open it. This proven not true. There are rumors that there was people on the other side
Like holding the door
holding the doors,
shut.
not letting them out. Or that maybe they were blockaded for a short amount of time and then all that happened and they took off. But there's no proof of that.
And you have
But
to
the doors
wonder
did open
if there were
outward,
people barricading it when the firemen showed up, wouldn't they have tried to get to that door first? Do you know what I'm saying?
right?
Right? Like they would have tried to go there, open the door, and then pull the people
You
out.
couldn't pull
But if
them
they
out, Tara. When you
couldn't,
see the pictures, you
oh,
c-
shit.
yeah, you
Oh God.
they opened
Okay.
the doors.
So they did, but they were just.
They were literally stacked on top of like sandwich slices, like
Oh my
layered
God.
Jenga pieces. They had to go from the
They
top
had to go from the
to
top.
start pulling
Okay.
people off
Oh.
because you
Oh.
couldn't pull them out. I mean, it was a
Ugh.
horrific, horrific sight.
Yeah.
So, I obviously they say that several witnesses say they saw a man wearing a dark coat. I'm sure you probably read this if you know
Hmm.
anything about the case,
I
because I
did.
feel like this is one of the only things that everybody knows. There's a man wearing a dark coat with his hat pulled down to hide his face. No one recognized him as a minor, and they remember seeing a pin on his coat which bore red letters reading Citizens Alliance. Supposedly, after motioning and urging people for their attention, he shouted fire and then ran down the stairs and into the street. Now, Waddell's strikebreaker, Edward Manley, was seen in the stairwell after the shout of fire. So, this is one of his thugs.
Right. Right.
They say he had gone in the stairwell to help people, but he was never questioned and disappeared from the area.
And he wasn't trapped.
And he wasn't trapped. He got out. But
Okay.
some people did get out. They said
Hmm.
several dozen people got out first before
Before the incident
someone had
happened. Yeah.
fallen and the stampede started, and then
Hmm.
they just couldn't stop it. So Was it him? Was it it seems very likely that this was an attack on the strikers and
Mhm.
their families.
Mhm.
It's
It
hard
sure
to
does. It's
believe
hard. Yeah,
that it's
I
not.
agree. I agree.
And obviously, like we talked about, the front page news read differently depending on who they supported, the striking miners or mine management. So Moyer is the head of the WFM, and he did not say anything. So he did not say Citizens Alliance did it, blah, blah, blah. He kind of kept his mouth shut, but he started sending telegrams across the country asking for an investigation into the tragedy.
Oh,
He
okay.
says, this is suspicious and
Mhm.
this isn't right. We
Right.
need help. But that didn't get him very far. So the local authorities and mine management confronted Moyer. They told him to stop sending the telegrams and that he needs to issue a statement absolving the Citizens Alliance from any involvement. And then when he refused, the sheriff basically told him, "You're on your own now. I can't do anything to help you. Like, I gave you your warning."
Wow.
That evening, Moyer was attacked.
Oh.
He was shot in the back, he was beaten,
Uh,
and he was threatened to be thrown from a bridge in that area. They then put him on a train to Chicago, telling him never to come back.
well, if that isn't suspicious in itself,
I'm sure they're innocent.
nothing to see here.
I'm sure they're completely innocent. Crazy. So, court investigation goes into the tragedy. Nothing is ever conclusive. This baffles me.
Yeah.
Baffles me. There's no conclusion.
Mhm. I know.
They
I
said that
did.
it
I
was
didn't
such
know
a
that either.
disaster because they had to have so many different interpreters. And so it just kind of spun into a circle. Calumet wasn't prepared for this type of tragedy. They didn't have a morgue big enough for all the bodies.
Oh
The bodies were out laying in the streets.
my god.
They needed, over 60 children's caskets.
Caskets. Yeah.
So those were being shipped in from other areas. And in between all that, kind of the smoke and mirrors, the actual investigation into the tragedy, and then without Moyer's involvement,
Mhm.
that was it.
Oh, that's so sad and heartbreaking and awful and
It's really sad. So there was a mass funeral
mm,
on December 28th with over 20,000 attendees.
oh,
But a lot of people came to help. I mean, could you imagine 60 little children's bodies? It takes my breath away.
yeah.
I'm not trying, like, try not to cry. So all the churches got involved. Your religious denomination didn't matter at this point. They were buried separately. So from what I read, there was two different cemeteries, a Christian and Protestant, and then a couple were exclusive buried in private
Mhm.
areas, but it sounded like it was about half and half. So supposedly also the miners management and the Citizens Alliance, they raised money to help
Mhm.
aid the miners in this tragedy, but none of it was ever seen.
Oh, that's
I
awful.
And also, so Moyer, the guy who's supposed to, like, he's in charge of the WFM, he had a little bit of a checkered past as well. So there was rumors. I mean, I could have went on this. You guys could have got a history lesson for days, days. He had a checkered past as well, and there was rumors that he was benefiting off the strike and this and that. It was like politics in the 1913.
Mhm.
I could not even. I was baffled. Like I said, I went down this rabbit hole. You guys got so much information. It was
But I
insane.
appreciate the history because I didn't know all of that. I didn't know why this like I
Why
didn't
it
know the
happened.
culmination of what happened before the disaster and I didn't know I knew a little bit about the fact that it never really had a resolution, but I just there's so many things that you told me that I just didn't know.
Yeah, these people were in a bad
Yeah,
situation. It was
no.
terrible. So the strike, it didn't end officially until the spring of 1914. But after this disaster, not a whole lot happened. No one
Mhm.
really did anything. The automotive industry had picked up, and Henry Ford had been offering $5 a day to work on his automotive line. So most strikers left for Detroit.
Yeah.
A little bit, it could have been a little bit less money, but they were safer.
Yeah.
At that time, the WFM, they ran out of money. So those that didn't leave for Detroit, they ended up going back to work. They did have a shorter work days. They got their 8-hour work days and a tiny pay increase. It's such an unnecessary tragedy, but one of the good stories that we need to hear that our people, it just what happens when you try to stand up for yourself and they wanted something better.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, well, I mean, throughout history, we've seen this again and again and again when people are trying to stand up for their rights. Continuing today.
yeah, that's why I'm like, wow, we've come so far, but not that much.
No, we've come far, but at the same time, there's still those in power that keep pushing down the little guy and don't want them to get a leg up. And
No.
that's.
Um, so the Italian Hall no longer stands today, with the exception of its archway. So they did leave the archway.
Oh, it's kind of like a commemorative. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can visit it in Calumet. There's also a monument there with all names of the 73 victims. And then every anniversary, they do 73 luminaries that are placed on the walkway
Oh.
of the path.
And they still do this?
They still do this up to the
That's
path
amazing.
to
Yeah.
the archway. It's really pretty. There's pictures of it, and they do it every anniversary.
I want to see those pictures.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the happy pictures. And then I'll post pictures of there's the monument of the names, and then there's also something that they say in remembrance. So I think it's pretty cool that long ago and the city chose to keep that archway to
Mm-hmm.
remember that tragedy and still
I
honor
agree.
those people.
I agree.
So if you want to add that to your visit when you go to Calumet, you can
Yeah.
see it.
And now you know the history behind it. You don't need a tour guide. You had Jen in your
No.
ear.
And that concludes your lesson on Michigan's Copper Country.
There you go.
1913.
Good job. That was a
Thank
good story.
you.
Just in the fact that like I said, I just didn't know. I didn't know all the its and bits, as you always say. You know.
It was
Mm-hmm.
like I said, it's very different than what I would normally do. So hopefully people can appreciate it. But once I started reading about it, I couldn't stop. And
Yeah. Well, you know what? Hey, we said we don't know what road this podcast is going to take us down or what we might discuss. Like, you guys might get some really interesting stuff, like a history lesson or a conspiracy theory, or who knows. But if we come across it and we can't stop reading about it, we only have limited time in our week to figure out a story. So that's what you're going to get.
yeah, right.
And I like this one. You did a good job.
So on Christmas Eve, think about these
Yes.
people, take a pause, these people who lost their lives for better working conditions.
And maybe tell your kids about just the gist of these people had nothing and this community tried to come together and give these children what they could and it wasn't much. And so damn it, kids, be grateful that for the things that you have today and be, just right. We're constantly trying to find ways to get our kids to help others and do things in their community. And don't get me wrong, my kids love doing all of that. But there's just times, when you question, you're like, do they get it?
Oh yeah.
Do they understand?
I want my children to be satisfied with what they have and want more, but not feel like that's going to bring them happiness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes any sense whatsoever. But with society's desire to think that more material items are going that equal success or bring you joy, when those are great, but if you could just be happy with what you have,
that's the key.
That's the key. I'm not sure if I make any sense whatsoever.
You
but
absolutely do.
I try to tell my kids all the time. I'm like, that's great. You want other things, like you got to work for it, but you don't need it right away. And think about it.
And even if you work for it and you earn it and you can afford that for yourself, that's fantastic. But once you get it, your life hasn't changed.
Nothing's changed.
Nothing has changed, and that's what they need to realize. Absolutely, 100%. So, on that note,
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to all of you out there. May your Christmas be merry on all of your Zoom meetings and hopefully with your quarantine people.
Yes. Eat some good food and Enjoy some cozy time. Hopefully, you get snow in the areas that people get snow and want snow. I like snow for Christmas. If you
I'm
don't want it, I hope you
praying
don't
for
get it.
snow. I want the snow. I just want it for Christmas, and then I want it to kind of like maybe stay for a little while so we
Yeah.
can
I
sled,
don't mind a
you
mid-January
know?
snow.
But by Easter, come on.
It's nuts.
It's getting ridiculous.
Welcome to the Midwest.
Yes. Yes. Well, hey, what last year or the year before we were trick or treating in the snow on the ground with our
Yeah.
hot spiced wine and
Yeah.
freezing our butts
Well, and we
off.
had snow on Easter too.
And on
Was that last
Easter,
year or the year before?
it
One of
just
these
never
years.
stopped snowing. And then, you get like an inferno winter where it's, hey, it's Christmas and it's 73
It's
degrees.
so
You just
weird.
never know.
You don't. You don't.
So
So wherever you are, we hope you get the weather that you desire, and we will check in with you after Christmas.
we sure will. Have a good one.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.